Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Buddhang dhammang sanghang namsami. Good evening, good morning in Zoom land, wherever you are. We're in heaven here in the Neranara. I'm calling it retreat center now. Because if I say resort to my friends in Canada, say, what? I want to go. But we're very fortunate to be here. Everyone's very kind and to have such a facility. I mean, this hall was built to accommodate more yogis. It's quite astounding. Retreat centers in Canada are very hard to find, very hard. And we rent a ex-Christian seminary that was Christian monks and nuns used for training on the Ottawa River. But one of the things we're considering at Tisarana now that we have a new Dhamma hall is how can we accommodate retreats, but we don't have accommodations. So a group of friends from the West Coast, from Portland and San Francisco area, they're considering doing a pilgrimage to Tisarana in a year's time, October next. Rent Airbnbs, like for Katina you can, and then just come for the retreat and then go back to the house for rest and meals. So we're trying to figure out how we can use that beautiful hall, but where the monks aren't retreat managers, because monks don't sign up to manage retreats, and they sign up for a different reason. Do you use the word sign up? You know what I mean, right? So we have a new meditation hall thanks to the generosity of all of you, and it's a beautiful hall. Really, trouble is I haven't driven it yet because after the day after the Katina, I was off to San Francisco for their Katina, so I'm looking forward to getting back in January and doing a long retreat there. So Anumotana for all your generosity and kindness. It's a very simple building, but a very elegant, I would say, in its structure, and the workmanship is really very, very beautiful to behold. And Ajahn Chah, he wonder about beauty, and I think a lot about beauty and craftsmanship because I like to make things, and I look at how things are designed and so on, and I often think about why do we humans, and I've often spoken about this, why can we perceive beauty? Have you ever thought about that? Like as human beings, like the squirrel. Does the squirrel look at the tree and think, wow? Maybe it thinks, wow, there's a lot of nuts in that tree. But probably the squirrel's vinyan is very utilitarian. Where's the food? And how can I breed? Or something simple like that. Yet we as human beings, we can appreciate shape and color, and it doesn't have to be in the way of greed. And one of the things most of us have noticed when we meditate and our minds become silent, we perceive beauty, don't we? You come out of a meditation hall and your mind is quiet and things strike you as beautiful. And that's not, I don't see that as tanha. Like tanha would be the simulated beauty of a new car or a new handbag, if we're doing handbags, or something where the manufacturers of goods know how to stimulate greed. And I remember I don't know much about cars, but as a teenager, you'd look at the latest design of a car. And I've heard that people do that with handbags too. But anyway, that's another story. But it was always amazing to me how in 2 years' time, those cars which looked really cool then, they looked old. Now, what's that about? How do they do that? Well, that's manipulated, propagandized beauty, I would say. But does an orchid ever look? It can look old, I know, but does the beauty of an orchid ever really look like last year's orchid was better than this year's orchid? So natural beauty to me is more like eternal. And where I touch that is when the mind is quiet and when the mind is not preoccupied with its own dramas and agendas. So what's that about? Why is that there? I ask myself these kinds of weird questions because it doesn't have to be that way. Beauty's not a necessary part of, maybe it is, I don't know. But to me, I'm always struck by the capacity of meditation to connect me to life in a way which is kind of strange because I'm just sitting here and I'm just trying to be quiet. And then I'm not out there. I'm not botanizing. I'm not a botanist checking out the species of flower. Probably that would make me less in touch with it. But when the mind's quiet, all of a sudden I'm not in the way anymore. I'm not making judgments or I'm not analyzing. I'm not saying anything about the way things are. And suddenly the way things are significant. That I find really, really interesting. So that's the way I look at mudita. Mudita for me is the heart's opening to an appreciation of things. And that to me doesn't create greed. I don't then run back to Tisarana and buy 20 orchids or something like that. It doesn't create greed. Not for me. It creates more fulfillment and a sense of satisfaction and a sense of gratitude. These kinds of states of mind. So as I was saying, the Brahma Viharas for me are very, very important, but they're not sort of, I was talking to my cultural consultant, Yom Vibun here, and I always come back. I said, in Thailand, do they? And we have a little cultural discussion. So say with Metta Bhavana, um, culturally, the way it's often done is to prametta, right? So I think of a loved one and then I send them love in whatever mystical, magical way that might work. That's a cultural way that exists in all cultures. Uh, um, but when you look at what the texts are saying, they're saying you develop the mind or the heart or the type of citta, which is compassionate, right? So if one were to merely leave metta as a kind of intellectual practice, a thinking practice, that wouldn't be the opening of the heart of compassion. And what exists in yoga, like the yoga schools developed after Theravada, after the Buddhist teaching, Patanjali and such like. So the teachings on things like the chakras and the energy systems that you find in the yoga schools, that postdates, from what I understand, postdates Buddhism. So those ideas came later in Indian culture. But Theravada culture kind of fixed its doctrine pretty early And then it was in competition with other doctrines in India. And so one of the things that is interesting in Theravada Buddhism, there isn't any Qigong, there's no Tai Chi, there's no yoga, which to me strikes as kind of strange because all traditions have body movement, they have energy, it all exists. So I'm like, well, where is that in Theravada? I don't know, but we pick it up. We all do yoga or we do, what do we do? People, but in the mornings, which is for me, Neranara. That sound is Neranara, definitely. But we use Tai Chi, and so we use those different systems. So where did it go in Theravada? Have you ever thought about that? Well, I think Theravada is a very intellectual um, doctrine. When you look at the text, it's really, really intellectual. And how do texts get manifest? The intellectuals are writing them down. Luangpor Chan never wrote anything. And then the intellectuals, they weren't probably teaching body movement. They're probably doing the scriptures. So there is one whole part in a Theravada tradition which is kind of missing, because that's the part that would have been transmitted person by person, person by person, person by person. And now in Theravada Buddhism, you have recordings, you have YouTube, and you have written material, but now you have the oral tradition, the tradition of the spoken word from guru to disciple, from teacher to disciple, that we can now have. So I often think, well, how many Ajahn Chahs were there for the last 2,500 years whose teaching never got published? But what got published or transmitted or that came to us were highly intellectual structures, lists, which are very good, but they serve an intellectual much more than they serve other types of people. Now, I can read. I'm not stupid, and I did. I've read the text a little bit, but my own path was more hearing Luangpor Cha's words, hearing Luangpor Sumedho's words. It was a oral transmission, person to person, and molded really in those interchanges to my needs, because the teacher's listening, trying to kind of tune in what's going on. Then that's how you interview or you talk with someone. You get a feeling for where they're at. You ask a question. No, that's not. You ask another question. No, that's. And then you ask a question, and they answer. Oh, okay, I get to where you're at now. And then there's real teaching. So real teaching takes place in the context of listening and dialogue. Not that real teaching cannot come from texts, and that's my very good fortune that I've had fantastic teachers. But also now we have the gift of YouTube, where we can hear Luangpor Sucitto or Luangpor Amaro, or every week we get a talk from Luangpor Sumedho. And it's fantastic. I know we complain about the internet, but that's a great deal. So we have the life of the teaching now from the human being, from the example that, like, if you've listened to Luangpor Sumedho, what strikes all of us is his humility, where he will portray his own difficulties in embarrassing detail. I found that so open and so honest and so uplifting. Not because he says I was great and then I got greater. He doesn't say that. I said I was pathetic, and then I struggled and I struggled and I had a good result. To me, that's the kind of oral tradition. So then in terms of the Brahmaviharas, when you get them, if you get them from Visuddhimagga or the different lists that we have, they're presented in an intellectual way. But for me, compassion is certainly not an intellectual exercise. And certainly I don't like the prayer part of it is to me not it's pretty insignificant, really. I think if I can be a good person, and that's going to radiate good enough. I like to think of people. I like to send them letters and say, "Hey, how are you doing? Is everything okay?" And I'll put, or I in my own letters, I'll say, "Oh, I'm going to be teaching a retreat. Pray for me," as a kind of a joke. So there is that. But in terms of what we're developing meditation, it's in the stream of consciousness. There are wholesome states of mind, neutral states of mind, and unwholesome states of mind. And in that stream of consciousness, we can be aware that this is wholesome and this is unwholesome. We have that capacity. And we try to develop the wholesome and abandon the unwholesome. Simple enough. So then metta bhavana is a wholesome state of mind because it's not selfish. It is connected. It's not about tanha. It energizes us. It gives a way of relating to each other. It makes us happy. So the way and this came up, the way I've developed the Brahma Viharas is by being aware of the body, not by doing lists. So when I tried Metta Bhavana with the list, you do 3 friends, is it you do? And then you do maybe an enemy, is that right? And then you do a neutral person. And okay, that's reasonable. Great. Never worked for me. But when I look at a picture of someone that I have affection for, then I can feel, oh, affection is here. And when I look at a picture of someone I dislike, maybe a politician south of the border, I didn't mention it, I didn't say it, then I can feel something else. Like I can feel disgust maybe or something. And that's an interesting one, to look at a picture of someone that I might have no real respect for, and then just hold that and then say, yeah, but this person suffers too. They also suffer. So a politician suffers the suffering of a politician. A poor person suffers the suffering of a poor person. A rich person suffers the suffering of a rich person, etc. A king suffers the suffering of a king. And a monk suffers the suffering of a monk. And so in terms of wholesome and unwholesome, I can see that if I hold on to a perception of hatred, I create myself, not just that. So hating a politician, everyone in your team might agree that politician is terrible, or that person is corrupt, that person is a killer. Sure, everyone will agree with you. But if I take that position as me and them, then in stream of consciousness, what have I created? I've created a problem, because that hatred will then be the way another person of the same type manifests. That tendency to hatred will then manifest as well. And then eventually it'll probably manifest in someone close to me, and then maybe back to myself. So if you invest in hatred, you're investing in bankruptcy. Not bankruptcy, maybe jail time, right? So which doesn't mean that you like someone that is obnoxious or truly cruel. You don't like them. You couldn't like them, but you don't have to hate them. And that's the idea of metta. First of all, like there's many levels you can think about this, but the level of non-hatred is something that I can do. I can't, like a really good example of that. When Pol Pot died, there's a picture in some news magazine of his funeral pyre, and he was burned with a tire. An old rubber tire was thrown on his body, and a few bits of wood, and he was burned. I mean, it's so pathetic. And he was a monster, a real monster of a being, not even a human. And Luangpor Viradhammo, kind of out of nowhere, says, "Yeah, but his dog probably liked him." And we all said, "What?" And you could see he was kind of just playing with us, because hatred would be justified for someone like Pol Pot, wouldn't it? Wouldn't it? Wouldn't that be right? Huh? Yeah, but his dog probably liked him. That really challenged, yeah, okay. And then the mind, okay, here was a being that suffered. Here was a being that suffered. Now, I might not, like I had in New Zealand, we had a lot of Cambodian refugees, and I've friends of the monastery and friends since then who went through the hell of the Khmer Rouge. And so I wouldn't talk like this to them, but I can protect my own heart from grasping something and then holding it with hatred. And that is metta bhavana. That's about the way of the mind is functioning. So sometimes metta bhavana gets, or just the attitude of metta gets mistaken for liking someone. That's not it. We talk about the end of greed, hatred, and delusion, don't we? In that sense, anger, I don't think, is a big deal, unless you have anger issues, right? Anger is a flare up, right? It flares up and you've got the flu and someone pressures you, say, "Oh, shut up, leave me alone." That's not hatred. That's just heat. And we know with each other when it's just heat. We say, "Ooh, ooh, okay, 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 okay." But when someone hates, then, oh, that's toxic. I don't want to be near that person. That's dangerous. So in terms of say, if I were to look at a picture of someone who would be quite despicable in the eyes of everyone else, I'd certainly feel that. I'd feel that here, kind of, or, and then I could look at that picture and then feel it and see, can I perceive this as someone who suffers? Can I do that? So in the midst of a perception, which is very, very strong, I can play with it because, I've got the space and time. If it's on the street, then that's different. With this war in Gaza, we had a Israeli friend, Larry Shorts, visiting for the Katina. And he says it's so difficult because everyone's wrong and everyone's right. And he's a really very compassionate man, but the heart just can go so crazy with hatred and crazy with compassion and all kinds of things. So there's extremes that we as human beings can feel, but then where do we take that feeling? Like, do we take it into thought and belief and separation? And then you get war, and you get war. So that we call that like the sense of othering, that other side, the other side. They're the bad guys, and we're the good guys. That's very dangerous because that's the dehumanization of beings, and that leads to more hatred and so on. So, in the beauty of Buddhism is that all beings suffer. All beings want to be free from suffering. And just as I don't want to be hated, they don't want to be hated. Just as I like to be loved, they like to be loved. It's universal. It's not our team. We Buddhists against them non-Buddhists. I'll just love my little Buddhist clan, and the rest of you guys can go to hell. It's a grand vision. It's a grand vision, isn't it? And then you have like the line that just as a mother loves her child, her only child, so should, with a boundless heart, should one love all sentient beings. What a line. Can you imagine, like, where in human literature is there a more exalted sense of compassion? A mother, her only child, you have to love all, and it's impossible. You can never love anyone that way, but it certainly wakes you up and challenges you to not believe in any moments of hatred. And in that, you protect yourself and you protect your family, you protect your culture. Now, so there is the appreciation of human goodness, of human achievement. That's the opposite of jealousy. Um, like, did I feel happy? Did I feel mudita for the election of a certain political candidate south of the border? No. It was kind of very interesting that that morning I turned on BBC. Okay, this person had won. I turned it off. I haven't looked at the news since. I said, enough. I don't need any more bad news. But if someone said, well, you should have mudita for his victory, I said, it's too much for me. I'm not a saint. I can't do it. But I cannot hate. And I can say, yeah, may this being do good work. May this being not create bad karma. Mudita was a bit hard for me. Now, I like to, I like the ideas of an embodied practice. Ajahn Sucitto uses that word a lot. Embodied means it's in your body. So love, or so you say compassion, is an embodied feeling, which for me vibrates here. And this is in the yoga traditions, that's the heart chakra, the chakra of the center of compassion. In Theravada literature, you won't find it explicitly. You'll find it in culture where we talk about the heart being open, but in yoga schools, it's, there are mantras to do, there are visualizations to do, there are practices which are done. But it certainly is a physical feeling, no doubt. Me, when I see, and I was saying in one of the interviews, I use pictures a lot to stimulate wholesome states of mind, to explore wholesome states of mind. And I've said this in many contexts, but on my computer, on the desktop pictures, I have various, I use pictures a lot, but there's 3 significant photos which I use for the practice of mudita and compassion. 2 for compassion are, one was, there was a very famous picture of somewhere on the Mediterranean, it might have been Italy, where a rescue worker has picked up a dead child, maybe 2 years old. It was all over the news, and he's holding this child so delicately. Child's dead, drowned in a boat from coming from Africa somewhere, dead. And it is such a tragic picture, such a tragic picture. When you think of refugees and the tough time they have, and then they're cheated on, and all the horrible things that happen there, and the child dies. So look at that picture, And I said, where do I feel that? I feel that here. But I don't think about it. Because if I think about it, then I just think about the horrors of refugees and war and starvation. I don't want to go there. I know that. But that's intellectual. It's cerebral. But when I look at the picture, I let the image come to me, and I let myself feel, wow, suffering is like this, birth is like this, human loss is like this, and I just stay there with it. Now I don't get depressed because that would be thinking. If I started to think, oh my gosh, global warming, Gaza, Ukraine, South Sudan, it goes on, then I would get more and more depressed. But the feeling of compassion to me is very important because then I can relate to human suffering from compassion. That's what it's for. And then the second picture on compassion is 2 years ago, there was a burst dam in Turkey. And I think several thousand people got wiped out in an hour or even less, just this burst dam and like a whole town got wiped out. And there's a woman, she's maybe 40 years old. She has a hijab on. Um, and she's holding herself like this. She's just lost her whole family. Oh, it breaks your heart. That's the idea of it. So I look at that picture and I say, yeah, human suffering, it's like this. Human birth is like this. But I don't go to thought. I mean, that's a thought, but I don't go into proliferation. And that's actually a very important feeling for me. Because then I can connect to human suffering. But it doesn't make me depressed. I'm a pretty happy guy. Can be pretty silly too. I can be frivolous too. But that's a kind of, so when I do metta karuna bhavana, this would be karuna bhavana. That's the way I do it. That's the way I touch that in a very realistic, not in a cerebral way. But say with the mudita, I just came across this delightful photo of I think I talked with the group, the angel group, about this. I might have even showed you, I can't remember. The three people in the photo. One is a 90-year-old woman looking quite vibrant, and she is looking up. She's she's less than 5 feet, I think. She's looking up at a young man and kind of putting her hands on his shoulders. And he's looking down at her and they're just smiling. It's this beautiful, beautiful smile. And behind them is a younger woman, and she's smiling at both of them. And she's the dance teacher. They're both dancers. She's 90 years old, and she's just vibrant in her energy and in the look. And I look at that picture, it makes me really happy. And that's mudita, isn't it? That appreciation of beauty and loveliness that we can be as human beings and relate. And I look at that, but I don't want to go dancing. I'm a bit old for that. And I'm not looking for a dance teacher, honest, if anyone's thinking about that. He set me up an appointment at Siri Rod for a dance teacher. But I feel it here, don't I? Oh, okay. So an exercise like that literally opens the heart. Literally opens the heart. Now, what happens when you open the heart? You reference things like fear and desire. So not so much now because I don't suffer from fear and social anxiety, but I guess if there was a bear or something, I'd get my fear going or something. But generally, I don't. I've worked that through. But if there is any form of anxiety coming up, it also registers in the body, doesn't it? And this is what I mean by an embodied practice. You understand these things in your body, not just conceptually. And that is wisdom, isn't it? Wisdom isn't just thought. when I feel compassion, I know what that feels like. And that's wise to me. It seems wise, yeah. And when I function from that, it's a wise way to function. So then things like fear, social anxiety, and the whole range that fear can take also are an embodied feeling if I take the time to be more aware of my body. Now, and we were talking about this in the interviews, so that's why I'm kind of repeating this. If I have if I'm anxious about something, then it'll very quickly go into thinking, won't it? And that thinking will, to some extent, be necessary. I need to plan because the future is a bit unsure. But after a while, the anxiety drives the thought, no longer the necessity. At first, necessity drives the thought. You have to figure out what you have to do about this problem. But after a while, you've thought about it enough. You thought about it maybe too much. And what's driving the thinking now is anxiety. And then the anxiety has no end because thought can never figure out the future. So any answer you have, the anxious mind will say, yeah, but maybe the other thing will happen. And so the thinking mind can never resolve anxiety at that level. Can't. It's impossible. So how do you resolve anxiety? You make it conscious in your body. That means you have to have a kind of direct contact with it. And that's why I was talking about pure awareness. Pure awareness knows fear is fear. Anxiety is anxiety. Vedana is Vedana, if you will, or Rupa is Rupa, if you want to, something. Anyway, if you want to use that language. But there's this direct contact. And what is that? That's when you let go of the thinking and you wait. So anxious thoughts coming up. And this means you have to give yourself time. If you're so busy where you can never process your anxieties, well, then you'll probably get more anxious as you get older. That's karma, right? There's no free lunch here. So there's a price to pay for being anxious. And the price to pay is more anxiety. It's not your fault. It's just the law of karma. Anxiety begets anxiety. You can't get around it. But the arising of anxiety can be known as an object. Now, if I can then have enough time in my life, I think, to observe anxiety in a safe space and just wait, then it will come up in the body. Because people will sometimes say, well, just feel the anxiety. So I don't feel it. Well, you haven't given it a chance. You haven't waited. When I ask you to do a body meditation, I say, feel your left elbow or something like that. And then you wait, and then something becomes conscious there, isn't it? And it's not that your left elbow wasn't there before, it was always there. Oh, wasn't my left elbow? It just wasn't activated through consciousness, because consciousness is the activator. Life is only possible through consciousness. So the same with anxiety. It might not be huge, a little worry or whatever it is, but you say, oh, this is the habit of worry or the habit of anxiety. And as you get to know yourself, you see, I tend to worry or I tend to be anxious. Again, that's a habit that comes up. Then in your meditative life, you're sitting and you see, oh, there's the pattern. There's that pattern of worry. And then you say, well, I wonder what worry's like in the body. And then you wait, there's nothing. Well, that wasn't worth it. No, you haven't waited enough. Wait, stop. Wait. And then your body starts to feel the tension of that. Feels it here, very much in the hara, fear. The breathing mechanism isn't relaxed. The throat quite often is tight. But you learn about fear and anxiety in this is a whole range, isn't it? From a minor worry to a panic attack. There's a whole range of stuff that can go on. And you just become really, really intelligent about understanding the nature of fear and anxiety, but not intellectually, viscerally, physically, embodied way. And as you do that, the puru, the knowing becomes stronger because now you're no longer the victim of fear and anxiety. And also the anusaya, the tendency for that to be manifest dies away. And that's one of the ideas of Nirodha. Upadana, as I often say, upadana means attachment, but also means fuel. And it's an interesting combination. And what is attachment? Thinking anxious thoughts with the narrative of self, that's attachment. Saying to yourself, what's anxiety feel like? Is right thought. And then feeling it in the body is right attention, samasati. And then bearing with it is like right effort, bearing with it. And then the anxiety has a chance to manifest. And that's the old fire, the old fuel. That's the upadana that came from the last 20 years. You don't need lifetimes to figure that out, just the last 10, 20 years. Now, so there's still a fire going on, but now you're not putting more fuel on. And that's why we say you need a lot of patience for this. You got to be really, really patient. And you have to be kind to yourself. Viradhammo is really suffering. There's a lot of anxiety. May he be free from suffering. That kind of language rather than, oh God, there's that anxiety again. What am I going to do? Oh, I think I'll have a whiskey or something or something like that. No, you're allowing it to come up. And that's one aspect of metta, the allowing of the unallowable, as it were, the allowing of that which you've not wanted to look at or be in consciousness. That's another way to look at metta. And that's why most of, like Luangpor Viradhammo, most of the teachers I know, we really see metta and awareness as synonymous in many ways. Now, if metta is only left as a kind of practice that you do, a prayerful practice, then it won't make any sense. But in this way, if I want to liberate anxiety from consciousness, if you understand that model, first of all, if you agree to that model, that anusaya are the latent tendencies created by upadana from the past, and they have the potential for, in this case, fear and anxiety come up. You have to agree with the model. If you don't agree with the model, then you wouldn't do this. I think the model's right. But so as it comes up, is it a bad thing? Is anxiety and fear, when it comes into consciousness, is a bad thing? Well, it's not pleasant, that's for sure. But is it a bad thing? Well, if you look at it in terms of liberation, it's being liberated from consciousness, then maybe it's a good thing. As long as you feel safe and as long as you have the space. And more, I think you do say, okay, bring it on. Let's have it. Okay, Mara, come have a cup of tea and a hamburger or whatever you want. So then your whole attitude to like kilesa or anusaya is no longer one of fight and struggle. It's the open awareness of knowing the way things are. And that, to me, is metta. Metta, not just a bhavana, but an attitude to all things. When you do that, in stream of consciousness, what's going on? In stream of consciousness, anusaya means when the condition causes and conditions are right, fear arises. In this case, fear arises. That's an unwholesome state of mind. If you attach to it, you suffer. You now deal with this unwholesome state of mind with a wholesome state of mind. Metta, sati, welcoming awareness. So the wholesome state of mind now is what you're putting into stream of consciousness. And the unwholesome state of mind is no longer being fueled. So the unwholesome states of mind starts to die. And what replaces it is the wholesome state of mind. Very logical. And that's what paticca samuppada, that conditionality is pointing to. You have to be very patient. You have to trust that model. You have to remember that model, I think, too. You forget. That's very logical, and you totally forget. And then doing it over time, you see, wait, I'm not afraid. Wow, I'm not anxious. Just not there. And you say, oh, he was right. Or whoever told you that. You might immediately, it might even get worse. The fear might even get worse. The manifestation might get worse, but that's okay. Your attitude now is in the present moment. There is wholesomeness of attention and acceptance. Now, if that fear then is going into thinking, then you're no longer aware of the fear. You are now abstracted from the fear into thought. And if the thought is fearful, ego thought, then it's a disaster because you're now, that's upadana. Now you're feeling the fear and you're creating more fear in the future. You're creating more problem in the future. So you begin to see there's an urgency in practice. Like I say, there's no free lunch. You pay for everything. So if I indulge in hating someone for, let's say I just really I get some bad friends and we get into some really hateful talk and we feel really self-righteous. Yeah, that person and this person, and yeah, they're horrible. And I do that for 4 days. I'm probably going to have that in my mind for the next year because I've really believed in it. And I've created a strong ego, and me and them and me and them and me and them. I've created a reality, and that's karma. That's intention. But if in these so-called friendships, I see this is not skillful. This destruction of another person is not good. I'm out of here. I don't care what I'm not participating in this. I don't want to pollute my own mind. I get out of there. I save myself a lot of karma. A lot of karma. And so we create each other, we create beings, and it's true, there are people, and we need to, we need to talk about people who are unreliable. We need to help each other, and people who are are not helpful. Sure, that's just good kalyana mitta, helping each other navigate society. But we don't have to create them as permanent entities. And then, because if we create them as permanentes, we create ourselves. So something like, say, self-righteousness, I'm right and they're wrong, is a very, very intoxicating mindset. You notice how, you know what a demagogue is? Demagogue in Thai? My cultural attache. Anyways, like a politician that gets everyone up in hatred. That's a demagogue. They just oh, that other side, they're bad. Yeah, you're right. That's a demagogue. That energy is called self-righteousness. We're right and they're wrong. And we're going to kill them and we are right. That's how war starts. And it's a very intoxicating feeling, but it's very egotistical and very dangerous. Wrong speech, to say the least. So in our conversations with each other or whatever, guard the mind from that, which doesn't mean you can't gossip. I mean, a bit of gossip never hurt anyone. But it's not like you're not hurting anyone, or your intention isn't to hurt or to harm. It's more to inform and help understand people and things like that. That's much, much, much different. So in our Buddhist way of practice, we talk about stream of consciousness and the awareness of stream of consciousness. So in my model of foreground and background, stream of consciousness is the foreground. It's the events. It's the feelings, and it's the memories, and it's the thoughts, and it's the pain in the knee. It's all of that. And the sounds of the birds. It's all of that movement, stream of consciousness changing. And then there's the knowing. That's the background. This takes place. And if I can just know stream of consciousness and not get caught up into it, I realize that the background is very, very peaceful, profoundly peaceful. When I'm caught up in the foreground with my angers and fears, then I lose that, and I have to deal with that. I have to figure out how not to get caught by that, how not to get sucked into that. And that's the work that we all do. And then upekkha is like, upekkha comes a lot from being patient with non-upekkha. So say something like, the arising of fear is certainly not a feeling of upekkha, but the knowing of fear and the acceptance of fear is the practice of upekkha, because I'm accepting something which is unacceptable. And then as the fear ceases, the mind also is a mind that doesn't get rattled by fear, whatever. But people say to me, oh, I get so upset. How can I do upekkha? Well, be aware of feeling upset. That's the only way you could do it. You can't like just turn a switch and say, well, I'm just going to do upekkha now. Nothing's going to bother me. Good luck. You get bothered by what you get bothered by. It's just the way it works. But as you get bothered, you say, oh, bother feels this way. And now you have the anusaya of getting upset. You always get upset like that. Now that's the anusaya. Now the wholesome state of mind is, oh, I feel really upset right now. I'm really irritated by this person, and it feels like that. So the anusaya comes up, you know it, you're patient with it, and it begins to cease. So the peace of mind is also an open-hearted thing. You're not suppressing things. Upekkha isn't a suppression of things, and a peacefulness it's very open, it's very relaxed. So Luangpor Cha, like the Brahma Viharas were manifest in him. Yeah, he was cool. You couldn't rattle him. He was great. Uh, Also, like this, he was like a uh, just deeply compassionate. Just radiated off him. Usually you hear about Luangpor Cha as really the fierce teacher, but he was just so loving, but fearless too. So you wouldn't mess with him. And he'd tell you, come on. But you knew it was coming from a good place. So for me, it was a huge example of the Brahma Viharas. That's why I say, what would an Arahant look like? Well, 5'2" with a big smile and a Thai kind of Cambodian face. No. Yes, that, but also it would look like metta, karuna, mudita, upekkha. So it would look like.